née Spector. I was born in New Haven, Connecticut, July 14th, 1922. Today's date is October 30th, no, it's not 19, it's 2001. It's just unbelievable that I am here. I never expected to reach this venerable age.
So you were born in New Haven.
Yes. My parents were had emigrated from Lithuania. They were avid radicals, part of the communist movement, and there was always something going on, meetings.
In your house?
Well, at my house, and also in the little center that was very close, the workers' circle center, or whatever they called that at that time. So I grew up, with the International singing in my head. That was, I can remember being a little kid and kind of being in a meeting and falling asleep, listening to speakers. My mother was one of the first women's advocates, women's rights. I mean, she always was grumpy about the fact that men, didn't have to do all these things. And just because I was born a woman doesn't mean I have to do the floors and do. She complained a lot. Let's see, what else?
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one older sister. About 7 years older. My father had been married before. His wife died during the influenza epidemic. And so in those days, of course, my sister says that nothing was said. Just one day her mother was sick and went off and never came back, and nobody explained to her what had happened.
That was 1919 or something? Around that?
I don't know.
1970.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I have a younger brother. We are sort of the two from my mother. And he's not even 2 years younger. We were quite close as kids, but life kind of pulled us apart. What else shall I tell you?
You went to school, you lived in New Haven the whole time?
Well, we lived outside Westville. And, both. We also lived in New Haven itself. And, I had sort of fleeting memories about May Day parades and sort of at some point, getting towards adolescence and putting the sign in front of my face, because who wanted anybody to school chums to see you, It was very difficult. And it was very difficult also in terms of religion, because it was, religion was the opiate of the people, and you'll eat pie in the sky when you die. It was songs like that. It was sung. So a lot of that. And I remember lying in bed and saying, God, if you really are up there, please try to understand. I'm only a kid, and I don't know. Who am I going to believe? My parents? Forgive me. So I had my talks with God way back.
Were your parents' families, what religion were they?
Jewish.
Jewish.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But they didn't. Your parents didn't practice.
No, and. There was on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. I mean, there was always a banquet, which my mother would cook for. So that was the nature of those days in the left-wing Jewish movement.
So that was the opposite of what you're supposed to do.
That's right.
You're supposed to fast.
You're supposed to
in
fast.
the Jewish
and they,
religion.
you know.
Yeah. So she was. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, to have one's parents be the real rebels.
Mm. Then the neighborhood wasn't all that way. Your
No.
other kids in the school
No.
were not.
No, it was just very small. I mean, it was a small group, but people were very close, the comrades. And my parents also sang in a choir in the Yiddish Gesangsverein. So for years and years and years, you know. And at one point, I think I was 12 or 13, they convinced me to join it to sing, and they were so proud. It was fun, actually. Yeah.
So they gave concerts and they.
Yeah, they gave concerts. The conductor would be somebody from New York who came out of the national office, because there were in all the little communities around, there were these kinds of. They were connected with the IWO, the International Workers' Order, and those kinds of organizations.
And so, what year would this have been that you're talking?
Yeah, well, with dates, I'm terribly bad. But let's say if I was born in 22, and then I was 10, 12, 35.
30s. In the 1930s,
In the
we're
30s,
talking
in the
about.
middle 30s, the middle to late 30s.
Mhm.
It was Hill House High School where I went to school, and I hadn't really found myself yet. I was very quiet and very withdrawn, and wasn't in the in crowd at all. Felt very much alienated because I was not the same. When World War II started, I sort of decided not to go to college, but to go to work in Washington, D.C. And I worked for the War Production Board and Office of Price Administration, all pretty, very tiring, very exhausting, and very boring kinds of activities. But that took me away from home, and I was living with first one friend that I knew from New Haven, and then another one. These people were friends of my sister's, and that was very difficult to be that far away. So eventually I moved to New York City and worked for the government there. And one summer, in 1949, I went to Camp Unity, which is a progressive camp in the, what do they call that area?
Berkshires?
No.
Catskills.
Catskills. The Catskills.
Yeah.
Where the radical swingers went, and but there were a couple of guys that, and I love to dance. To this day, I love to dance, and so there was Irv, and we were dancing. We danced a lot, and that was sort of the beginning. And very shortly, we just decided it was time. We both needed to be married.
Very quick, huh?
Very quick.
You knew it
So
was
we
right.
were coming back. We had gone on a little trip. We were coming back through Maine, and there was a sign. The Jewish lawyer obviously said, "Okay, we'll go in here. We'll talk to them." I remember the name of the lawyer, Listman. Listman and Listman. They were brothers. And they said, oh, they were very excited about the idea, you know, that we had eloped and that we would want them to help us get married, and that they were going to come and they were going to do it the next day. Well, it turned out that it was, in terms of there was some kind of holiday where you couldn't do this. So that it was just the usual sort of justice of the peace kind of. But of course, going back to New York, the night before, we were going to go back to these lawyers' office, and they were going to marry us one way or the other. We did call our parents, and I had been living out of, you know, in New York City, in the village, so I don't think it really shocked my parents too much that I was doing this kind of precipitously. And but let me see, what was
You
it?
went back to New York then?
Well, we went back to New York, but no, Irv at that time was working in Connecticut. I was working for the United Nations out at Lake Success. And naturally, the woman is the one, at that time particularly, there wasn't even a thought that maybe he should give up his job and come to New York because I was working for the United Nations. No, I left my job and went to the little town near Waterbury, Connecticut, where, you know, I was bored silly. I found one woman and her husband who we played bridge with, but basically it was very culturally deprived place. And it didn't really work so well, but then we moved to New York for a while. And through the years, I mean, there were a lot of changes. There were a lot of different places. We lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and we lived in Connecticut, and we lived in, and then finally we moved to Newton, Massachusetts, and bought a house.
What year do you think that was?
I think, shut that off for a minute and I'll think about it. In the middle 1960s, we moved from New Hampshire to Newton, Massachusetts. And by that time I had 3 children, 2 girls and then a boy. And the school system was purported to be very good, so there we were. And I soon became involved in the activities around, particularly when the Vietnam War started, and even before, when we did the activities around the ABM treaty. I can remember that we were called people to come to my house. Around the dining room table, we wrote thousands, sent out thousands and thousands of letters to people to
Protest.
And you know, before that there was strontium 90, and there were all the issues of that day, and the Hughes campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one of the activities that I remember specifically is when the Army announced that it was going to build a missile site in Andover, Massachusetts, and our members became quite incensed and worried about this. So we organized at my house that people should come rotating, until we would send out thousands of mailings to the people in the Andover area, warning them about this. So it was I would try to take care of my kids and let people in and out of the house and keep the coffee going, and it was quite an effort. And when it was over and we were successful, it just felt really good to have been part of it and know the power of our membership just to keep coming and coming and coming until this whole thing was accomplished and the mailing was out.
So you were mailing letters to the residents of Andover in the area to come to a meeting where this was going to be discussed?
Yes. There was to be a meeting, and I guess with the Army personnel as well, if I remember correctly.
And what happened?
So the proposal was finally beaten down.
There were a lot of people at the meeting?
There was a big outcry, and it was, and we won. And it was good to win because it wasn't often that we won.
So your mailing got a lot of people to the meeting.
Yeah.
And the Army got the picture that people didn't want this missile site.
Mm-hmm. What I understand is at that meeting, which I didn't attend, but friends of mine, of course, did, was that the Army, as a way to allay the fears of the folks around town, told them that they were going to plant lots of trees, and so it would be hidden, and they wouldn't have to be aware of it. That got a big laugh, but not very much approval. I was, by that time, my husband and I had separated, and so I was needing some work, and I went to work for a friend who owned an import business. They imported basically from Mexico all kinds of artifacts and lots of silver jewelry, and they had it in their basement at that time. Later on they had a warehouse, but at that time it was in their basement. And I had gone to a peace conference, women's peace conference, and realized that the war was happening, and there was all the anti-war activities, but people were making money. Commercial people were making money with posters and stickers and jewelry of all kinds, and peace symbols of all kinds. And I said, that seems awful. Why shouldn't the peace movement be making some money because of this activities? So a number of us were talking about this, and Ed Berkeley said he would give us some space that we could use to sell. So we got a lot of jewelry and other things from the Beloses on consignment, which means we didn't have to pay anything in advance, because we didn't have, like another commercial organization, we didn't have money. We had to sort of wing it. And then, there were cards. There was all kinds of things, and we did get it together. And we opened this little shop, and it became a kind of a little hub, because people would come and chat, or they would, they'd sign up for a few hours to work, and we did quite well. People would, as in this one of these articles, it talks about, give some of the money that you would have given into gifts, buy them here at our little shop, and you're supporting some of the boys who burned their cards, their draft cards, and so many organizations that we would then, at the end of the year, decide who would get this money. Also in the shop, there was a place for educational materials. People would walk in and pick up a few pamphlets of this kind and that kind. It gave us a challenge, and it was for me a very successful part of my life, because I felt it was hard to know what to do, how to, besides the demonstrations and those kinds of things. So we were basically a support organization through this to many other organizations.
It's being a hub.
Yes. So it was a number of years. I don't remember exactly how many years, but through those years, the Peace Boutique got to be quite popular. A lot of people knew about it. It could accommodate in the evenings. There would be groups of people who would meet there. It had to be small groups. It wasn't a really, really big place. Also for our own Voice of Women organization, we published a newsletter, and we had a mimeograph machine, and people would come and write their articles and get it together. I think Sue Berkeley had a lot to do with that, I think. And Harriet Avery, of course, who was, the two of us, I think, spent a lot of time there. So.
Were your children grown at that point, or they were?
They were in school. They were in junior high and high school, so they were pretty much on their own.
Mm-hmm.
When I think back about the boutique, it became a real warm and friendly place. Our people would come in just to talk about the terrible bombing and My Lai, whatever was happening. They would come in and chat with us. It was a place you could come and sort of bare your soul a little bit and have people that felt the same way that you did, and the usual thing that women do together, talk about your kids, how they were doing. And some of our children were very much affected by the war and became some seriously. So it was a place, and we became very close friends. There was a whole group of people that to this day feel close and loving, even though we don't see each other that often anymore. It's still, when we do, it's still there, that bond that happens around that time. don't know. Do you think this is too? I found a picture of four of us women from the Peace Boutique. This was the Boston Globe, Tuesday, December 23rd, 1969. And there are myself and Sue Berkeley and Louise Bruin and Harriet Avery. I'll just read a little bit from here. Scrunched between a Chinese restaurant and a barber shop on Newtonville's Washington Street is a boutique that's doing traffic jam business. The front window sparkles icy clean to reveal orange crates splashed white and kaleidoscope samples of what's to be found inside. Dolls, jewelry, cards, posters, pottery, photographs, and needlework. This Christmas piece is a red-hot item, chuckled Mrs. Hilda Schwartz as she fingered the silver medallion dangling from her neck, carved with a warning that war is not healthy for children and other living things. Mrs. Schwartz, a Newton resident and mother of two, is one of the 80 or more volunteers who have been manning the shop from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday. The volunteers are all members of the New England Voice of Women, a pacifist group which is loosely affiliated with the Canadian organization of the same name. The women are definitely activists as far as the peace movement in the Newton area is concerned.
Great.
Yeah. It's just that rush hour is just ghastly in that part of town. Oh. Yeah. Well, there were some really hard years, separating from my husband and divorcing, and trying to grow the three children basically by myself. But they are interesting people, and they're people who are still on the right side and have good values. Jonathan, who's the youngest, has made his career in doing good works in documentary film, most at first in environmental and now in social kinds of things, the latest being prison rape, and he's been going to prisons and worrying about himself too, he says somebody might knock him off, but so this all affected him, so he's been the one who's stayed closest to a kind of involved, compassionate life. Judith, the oldest, is a social worker. She runs. She's a clinical director of a clinic in Bellerica, the Stony Brook Counseling Center, and Amy is in the software industry. So they managed to get through the war and not be as tarnished as some of the other young people that were their friends. I'm trying to not get too involved in the story of my life because it's too hard. But I did, in 1986 and 7, do a program connected with the University of Massachusetts was working on elder affairs and public advocacy, and I did that. And during the course of that, there was a group that was doing drama, and a woman in that group, I was doing some photography for them, and a woman in that group said there are people who they need extras for this and that. And so I went along, and because of that, I did get to join the union, because I did a number of things, and you have to join the union, so it became a card-carrying SAG member, Screen Actors Guild, even though I had never been to any of the schools. I felt a little sheepish about that, but I did a few things, but then it got to be a little bit too difficult, because you sit around a lot, and it's not very profitable. But it was fun. It was fun. I'm not seeing the red light.
Yeah, there you go.
About 21 years ago, I moved out of my house in Newton and moved to the city. Everyone had left already. My husband, my daughters, my son, and it was too lonely to be there in the house all by myself. I had boarders, and some wonderful boarders who became my good friends, a couple from Israel that I still know. But at about a number of months after the move, I had a stroke, and it took me about a year to come back to myself. It was pretty tiring and a big struggle, but here I am. Believe it or not. Since that time, I mean, I'm aware of where my heart is and where my political feelings are, but I'm not as involved in organizations as I was in my younger years. But as I say, my feelings are still there. And this latest, the terrorists and what is happening in the world, and the bombing now again in Afghanistan, that does not feel very, very good. And I am at least thinking about what position to take. But I don't know how much I myself will have the energy to do. Another thing that I did during that wartime, Vietnam War time, I was asked by a group of people, medical people actually were involved in this, to help to raise funds to send medical materials to North Vietnam to help those people who were being so devastated. And I did become their executive secretary for some time.
What kinds of things did they do?
Yeah,
You saw Jane Fonda, you mentioned.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember one time when Jane Fonda was so involved in coming and speaking, she came to Brandeis to give a speech, and then we went to some kind of somebody's house where they were raising money, and I can remember walking around with her hand in hand, my little friend there, Janie. It's just fun to remember.
And Bernard Lowndes was involved in that?
Bernard, yes, he was there. He was the I guess the medical head of it, and we went to meetings together. And then there was a wonderful woman who had been a nun, and I'm sorry to say her name has slipped from my mind, but she was a very energetic woman, and she took over after a while from me.
And Sister Carita, how did you know her?
Well, my daughter became involved. It's a funny story. The kids were into the flower children, so to speak. Were dancing and on the green and the lawn, and Judith wore this dress which was impossibly short. But at that time, there was Harvey Cox was a minister over at Harvard, and he was an anti-war person, and he also brought in the music to his church and to his sermons. And I don't remember how he befriended my daughter, but his secretary would very often call and mention that there was going to be this and that, and she should come. And then sort of spontaneously she would get up on stage and dance. And there were a group of these Catholic activists. Amongst them was Sister Carita, and a few other people that Judith became very close friends with at that time.
Sister Carita was an artist who
She was an artist, and she was and then later her design was put on the gas tank, and it's still there in was it
South Boston,
South
is it?
Boston,
Or around
yeah,
there?
I think South Boston,
Dorchester, yeah.